Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Joe Emilio Show. I'm your host, Joe Emilio, and as always, well, not as always, with me tonight is Mark Oppenheimer, ladies and gentlemen, advocate extraordinaire in South Africa. You may have noticed or seen him when he was fighting the good fight against Julius Malema, and you have probably seen him in other cases as well. Mark, how are you?
Yeah, excellent, man. Thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So we got quite a few topics to talk about, but before we get into that, ladies and gentlemen, please, if you do have any specific questions for Mark, feel free to pop them into the chats. I will take note of them, and hopefully, towards the end of the stream, we'll address them. But if Mark feels that he wants to address any of the questions immediately, he's more than welcome to as well. Mark, I'm sure you can see the questions coming through if they do. Other than that, Mark, let's start with the hate speech bill. I don't even know if that's the correct title, but recently there was a bill, I think, in. Well, you explained. There's recently like a thing with the hate speech bill. Please explain why we should be concerned about this.
Okay, so a little bit of backstory. It's the Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill. It had There'd been a hate crimes bill that had been in the works for a long time, and the purpose of that bill was to be able to take into account when someone is motivated by hatred when committing a crime. So, in other words, it would be a different kind of sentence that you would get if you beat someone up because they're Jewish or they're black, as opposed to it was an ordinary assault. That process had been worked on for a long time. There was a hate crimes working group. And then the Penny Sparrow incident happens, 2016. And Minister John Jeffries says, what an amazing occasion to try and suppress speech. So let's tack on this hate speech portion onto the hate crimes bill. And the idea at the time was that, everybody hates Penny Sparrow. This is this most vile racist person, and we can't tolerate this kind of thing in our society, and we need to put these racists behind bars. And the press is cheerleading this, and this sounds absolutely wonderful until it's pointed out to them that the bill is a dramatic overreach and would result in a lot of journalists themselves going to jail. And civil society kind of stood up and said, hold on a second, we can't have legislation like this in a free and democratic country. And so everyone got together, they put in their submissions. I did some for clients. The kinds of things that would have been outlawed, it results in jail time, so many years in prison, where if you made fun of someone, ridicule was one of those things that was taken into account. And the way that it was drafted was incredibly restrictive of speech. So after the submissions came in, the bill disappeared for a number of years. It then resurfaced again in 2018, much better than the prior versions, but still quite clearly unconstitutional. At the same time, I was involved in a challenge to the Equality Act on behalf of John Quilani. And the Equality Act is currently what determines whether there is hate speech or not. And the Constitutional Court held that that act is unconstitutional for being too restrictive of speech and struck down the hate speech clause. It's come up with a new interim model. It's up to Parliament to put in a proper full definition, but it gets much closer to our Constitution. Although there were some deviations, and the argument was you could justify these deviations because in the equality setting, all you can do is fine people or make them apologize or interdict them from further speech. But in the criminal context, you're putting people behind bars. And so there you want to be very strict. So the bill has again resurfaced. The Minister of Justice has sort of taken into account some of the concerns. It's at the moment at a stage where they're trying to take into account people's proposals. It may get to a constitutional point, but my view is that when you're going to put people behind bars, you want to protect speech as much as possible, and you must abide by the test in our constitution, which is advocacy of hatred on the grounds of race, gender, ethnicity, or religion, and that constitutes an incitement to cause harm. Um, so there's a call to action. You're targeting out a particular protected group, um, and there you might have the latitude to punish people. What we have at the moment is that many more groups besides the four listed are included. So groups like age, language, culture, belief, all those things are included. The belief one is particularly strange because you might imagine that there's someone who believes that white people are better than black people. They have racist beliefs. And you say stuff like, we should boycott all of their shops. One of the grounds of harm that's listed is economic harm. Um, Now it seems like you've committed an act of hate speech that could send you in jail because you said don't buy from racists. So that seems like a weird problem. There's some other problems with how harm is defined. So it includes emotional harm and psychological harm, although through our submissions, the idea is that they have to be of a quite severe nature. But cultural harm has been added in, and social harm has been added in, and that stuff starts to worry me. I don't know what counts as a cultural harm.
Yes.
Um,
Sorry, I just want to jump in there because that's actually the main thing I wanted to talk about. Is that cultural harm? Almost another side of it is also offense. Like if you take offense to something, but like offense in itself is subjective, right? Any like I could say a lot of things on this channel that some people might find offensive to their ears. But if this bill goes through, I could be held accountable for those sayings. And then doesn't that muddy the waters quite a bit? I mean, how does one? Because as I understand from my dealings with the law, right? If let's say I say something offensive, but I didn't intend for it to be offensive. It was just you interpreted it as offensive. So now you would have to or we would both be in court. You would have to explain why you found it offensive, and I would have to explain why or what I said wasn't offensive. And in in order for either of us to win, the court has to kind of, um, whether it's your argument or mine, there has to be beyond a shadow of a doubt situation, right? Like whatever your defense is, then the court needs to see that as beyond a shadow of a doubt. Okay, that makes sense, Mark. You were right. We agree with you. Therefore, ergo, Joe, you're going to jail. Is that how it's going to be?
Okay, a couple of things to unpack. So the one is you talk about offensive speech. The case law basically says offensive speech is protected speech, but obviously we went into this difficult territory as to what counts as offensive and what counts as harmful. Um, and it seems like if we look at recent cases, it's pretty unclear.
Hmm.
That someone will say it's merely offensive, the other side will say no, it causes emotional harm. Very difficult to differentiate the difference between those two things. I mean, the case law uses strong words like, if it's shocking and offensive, it's still protected. Harm, how we traditionally understood it, is that it's physical harm. When you're calling on someone to go and burn someone's house down or assault them, we go, oh, okay, I know what that is. That's a type of harm.
But what
If
about
someone says,
emotional harm?
yeah, exactly. And what's emotional? Is it I got sad or angry for a bit, and then it
What
passed?
if the one argued, well, it caused me trauma, and I had to go for counseling, and now I'm on medication to deal with my anxiety.
Yeah, so then we might start to pay more credence to it. In other words, the kind of thing we go, okay, look, you've got an external expert who can substantiate this. Um, so maybe there you could say there's something more to it. It's not just a passing thing. It's like, as you say, an actual trauma. We can imagine some cases like that where that could occur, and we might think that's justifiable. Um, on the objective test stuff. So the way it works under the Equality Act is that it's not intention that matters. It's what the reasonable reader would understand the words to mean. Um, so when someone says a phrase, they can't say, "Well, I never meant it that way." You've got to understand it from the context. So it's not merely a matter of what the listeners say, what the speaker says. The judge is meant to determine it based on the ordinary meaning of the words in light of when it was said. Um, in a criminal test, ordinarily, as you say, we look at intent, subjective intent. This hate speech bill looks like it wouldn't do that. It would ask, did you intend on publishing it? But then when we're trying to work out the meaning of the words, then it's a reasonable reader test. And so that's also a deviation from the ordinary criminal law test and something worth flagging. Um, One of the other questions is whether the speech actually causes harm. So, incitement to harm, for example, doesn't actually require a harm occurs. You're calling on people to perform a harm, and you don't have to check whether the harm actually resulted, merely that you are inciting them. And in the equality setting, that strikes me as a fair test. But if you're going to jail someone, you might think that you should only have jail time if the harm results. Otherwise, you could have lower penalties. I think it's worth drawing those kinds of subtle distinctions.
Yeah, and it also does make it also very complicated, because again, the everything's it's you're muddying the waters. It's obviously during these kinds of proceedings, things get very emotional, especially for the plaintiff and the defendant. And yeah, it's just very difficult for me to imagine a world where, I have to be so careful about what I say on the off chance that someone might find it offensive or culturally offensive or whatever, offended or however you want to put it. I mean, isn't, like you said, this is gonna dramatically restrict our freedom of expression or freedom of speech, because even does it, and that's another question I have, is does it count for freedom of expression? Because expression can be, it's not just words, it's paintings, it's videos, it's movies, it's all that stuff. If I find I don't know, a painting offensive, can I take that artist to jail for that?
Yeah, so there are some exceptions built into the legislation, but they're not absolute exceptions. So they do talk about artistic work, scientific inquiry, religious texts. They're protected provided they don't incite harm. That's the claim. Um, and so they're not fully protected. You're right that it wouldn't just be words. The Equality Act used the term words, which was then later interpreted to kind of mean anything you want it to mean, like flags, for example. Um, but yeah, this one is drafted more broadly so that it would be all sorts of different kinds of communication. I'll give you an interesting case for cultural harm. So in Myanmar, there's a model who had an OnlyFans account and was jailed for 15 years on the grounds that what she was posting was a cultural harm to Burmese culture. Um, so that gives you a sense of how these things can be used. In other words, it's not plaintiff defendant as well, it's criminal. So the state decides you've done something that offends whatever culture, and so you must be punished and jailed. So, that seems like a worry.
That's a big worry, especially when you have a government like the ANC who can just, like, pick on certain people. They think, oh, well, we think what you're saying is culturally inappropriate to our nation, so ergo, you're in the chicky, which is a very big problem. But okay, I also want to know, as a comedian, I'm safe.
I wouldn't count on it at all. I mean, it's it's an interesting thing. So satire is sort of seen as a defense in the civil context for defamation, for example. Although it's one of those sort of areas that's a little bit dicey. We have the thing called the defensive jest, but it's been tested in our law and hasn't always worked. Um, Comedians strike me as a group that are particularly under threat. If you think about it in the States, comedians have been assaulted on stages, Dave Chappelle and, Chris Rock. Um, and I think there are cases of, there was a comedian in Egypt a while ago that was concerned about being jailed. Um, so, yeah, I'd be worried.
Well, what I'm okay, like obviously, if you're a comedian, you go out and say kiss the boar, kill the boar. That's a different story. But if I'm just out there, like, again, because comedy is subjective, right? There might be a joke out there that a lot of people find really funny, but there's that one guy or girl or whatever that says, no, 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 that joke to me was offensive for whatever reason. I don't know. I spoke about whatever topic, relationships, and it offended the person or whatever. That's where it can become dangerous, right? Because if that person felt offended by the joke, they could take me on. But can't I defend by saying, well, it's artistic, I'm a comedian, it's a joke?
Yes, so you'd have the defense of saying, let's say the claim was it's harmful speech. Okay, so let's say that's sort of similar to offensive speech. You could say, look, it was done in the context of art, and so look, the term they use is they say bona fide artistic creativity. They might go, look, Joe, we don't think what you're doing is art. You're a comic. We wanted to protect high art, real art.
Okay.
Classical music and painters, not you scumbag comedians. Who think you know what you're doing when you make fun of us government officials or whatever. So that be that worry. But if you were, let's say, inciting harm, And again, you're supposed to look at the context. So you got to sort of say, like, let's say you said, you know what? I'm just so sick and tired of seeing all these colonial buildings. They just fill me with absolute revulsion and disgust. And at the end of the show, I hope that all of you get out, and you go and grab yourself some gasoline, and you do what needs to be done to these like ugly buildings. But from the context, it's kind of clear that you're cracking jokes. You might not be protected. You might be. But the fact that you could go to jail for a couple of years might make you not want to tell the joke. You know.
No, well, no, you are right that comedians nowadays are a bit under attack, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, it's no longer safe to even tell jokes on stage. You could get slapped in the face, and that seems to be a trend at the moment. So, but for the most part, I think most people that go to a comedy show know what to expect. But there's always that one odd ball in the audience that might just ruin everything. But anyway, getting into more of the nitty gritty. So where does this bill stand at the moment? Is it going through? Is it becoming law? Are they still hashing definitions out? Where what's the stage here?
Yeah, so it's still at a committee stage. It hasn't been voted on. There isn't final language. It seems to have been going through many rounds of division. A number of organizations have put in submissions and participated, and there are still quite serious concerns. So it hasn't gone to a vote, but it's worth keeping an eye on.
And how is there a platform where we can submit like the public can submit like a comment or anything, or is that process now done?
That process has occurred.
Okay.
So I think the public put through about 100,000 submissions through DRSA. And interestingly enough, in the feedback session to all the different organizations that put in submissions, people got kind of responses. You got a summary of this is what you said, this is what we're going to do about it. Either we take your point, we're going to change it, or we take your point, we're doing nothing about it, or we think what we've done is fine. So it didn't take into account the public submissions. And then they said, "Oh, okay, fine, we'll take into account the public submissions." They also left out the IR and freedom of religion in South Africa. So they then revised that, took those into account, but dealt with the public in a weekend. And the view was, it can't be. You can't have read 100,000 submissions in a weekend. So that's still something to be dealt with.
Oh wow. Okay, so there's a lot of shady stuff happening as well. Okay, well that makes it interesting. But I'm gonna before we move on to the next topic, I'm gonna get to some of the questions that I highlighted here. The first one I'm gonna go to is Debbie Moray. Thank you so much for tuning in, Debbie. She says she has a question for Mark. What about sending a pic like the suggestive cartoons that have dual or double meaning? Can that be regarded as a lawsuit, or if it's offensive?
Yes. So there was, as I say, some debate in the Equality Act about what counts as the term used as words. And so there was a question as to whether things like cartoons counted as words. The early case law basically says the images aren't included. This got tested in the flag case, and there the court held no, words means images, symbols, flags. It's a real strange interpretation of the term. When you talk about speech or expression, I'll buy that could have broader categories. Words strikes me as a very particular form of speech. But yeah, so you could, let's say, in the defamation context, Zapiro was sued by Zuma for cartoons. The double meaning, so that might be one of the things that you have in defamation law is an innuendo. So it might be that it's on its face, the cartoon is innocuous, but once you know what the extra meaning is, that's the defamatory sting, and the innuendo is what could get you in the trouble. Um, then there'll be a fight over what the meaning of it is. But if it can bear that defamatory meaning, then you could be held liable. And I would think a similar thing about the hate speech. In other words, is one of those meanings uh, going to meet the threshold? If so, and it's a reasonable reading, then you could well be held liable for it. We can imagine, for example, like the term cockroach in Rwanda, could have a kind of, let's say it's meant just an ordinary insulting meaning, or it refers to actual cockroaches. There, it's referred to a particular ethnic group, and it was a kind of call to kill them. And so, that playing on the innuendo um, might very well amount to genuine hate speech.
There you go. And then another question from JC McFarlane with regards to this bill that's coming in. So I wouldn't be able to criticize the government.
No, I don't think that's the case, but it might restrict how you criticize the government. So bear in mind, one of the things that's a requirement of hate speech laws is that you're referring to a group, one of those protected groups. Now, the ones in the Constitution, race, gender, ethnicity, and religion, you know, are narrow. The ones that are in the bill are much, much broader. One of the ones that was in there was going to be occupation. And I pointed out in one of our submissions, well, if people want to make fun of politicians, because ridicule was one of the terms that was used, well, suddenly you'd be committing a crime. And so, that was withdrawn, the term ridicule and occupation. Um, so, but it might be that um, people might criticize the government in a manner that does meet the threshold and is also criticism. And so it might restrict how they're able to criticize. But I would think if you said the ANC are incompetent and they're stealing from us and thieves and things like that, that wouldn't amount to hate speech. Might very well be defamatory. And I saw that the ANC wanted to
Yeah.
sue the former mayor of Joburg for calling them a bunch of crooks. I hope they run that litigation. There's a very famous defamation case. There's a guy who was a restaurant critic, and he wrote this review about this guy's Italian restaurant. He said, the restaurant was absolutely filthy. There were rats running around, and the food tasted awful. So the guy sued him. He said, how dare you? The test in defamation law is, would a right-thinking person think less of you having heard the statement? And he said, you're going to think less of me having heard the statement. Anyway, so during the trial, they read all the evidence, and at the end, the judge says, I did an inspection in loco. I went to your restaurant, and the food was terrible, and there were rats running around, and it was absolutely disgusting. So it's true. And I would think that if a similar exercise was done with regards to the ANC, it would be pretty apparent that they are corrupt. I mean, you've got the Zondo Commission saying exactly that. So
Exactly. I was
sue,
gonna
go right
say
ahead.
hello Zondo Commission. Like that's all. That's all. The former mayor needs to do is just walk into court with the Zondo Commission. Boom, sorted. Case over.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, all right. So let's move on to the next topic, which is gonna we're gonna talk a bit about the expropriation bill that was passed by National Assembly about 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you know a lot about it, but let's talk about it. I'm a little bit concerned because I know that there's some things in that expropriation bill that are concerning. But I've spoken to a farmer now who doesn't seem too concerned. He's concerned about other things that are happening in South Africa, like load shedding and other things. And he has many good points. And DRSA also concerned, but waiting for expropriation to happen before they want to first see what happens before they do anything about it. Where do you stand on this? I regard you as a very knowledgeable advocate. You know the law quite well. So you as a lawyer, where do you stand on the expropriation bill?
Okay, so first of all, as you say, it's been passed by the National Assembly. It's still going to be passed by the NCOP and then signed into law by the president. So it's not an act yet. Uh, I've did a lot of work on the proposed changes to our constitution, which would have been absolutely devastating. And I'm very glad to see that the forces of good triumphs on that front. This piece of legislation, if passed, wouldn't be nearly as dramatic. But there are some sections that do concern me, and it strikes me as unconstitutional on its face. So the portion of the bill to check out for people that are interested is at section 12.3, which has the circumstances where nil compensation could be paid. It also lists circumstances, but says it's not limited to them. So that's a concern as well. In other words, not a closed list. Other things could be there. Normally we think in order for something to be a law, you need to know how it's going to operate. One of the ones that concerns me is it says where the land is not being used and the owner's main purpose is not to develop the land or use it to generate income, but to benefit from appreciation of its market value. So if you think about why you buy shares, why do you buy shares? You hope that they're going to be worth more money in the future. Um, you are only buying them for the sole view that they're going to appreciate in market value. Um, and we don't think that because you bought shares and risked your capital, because they could go down in value, like a piece of land could, that the state should be able to confiscate them from you and give you nothing. Um, So that's a concern. So scroll down. I see on your screen you've got 12.1. That sort of go down to 12 sub 3. Um, go
Sorry.
up a,
Two. I see two.
you might have an earlier version of the bill. Um, so there's a 2020 version.
Okay, wait. I'll let you continue.
Yeah. Um, So that's one of the cases that worries me. It seems like those of you who are familiar with Johannesburg, Midrand was owned by the Mia family, and it was basically big plots of vacant land. Um, and eventually, they decided they would develop it, and it was turned into Waterfall Estate, large parts of their land. But for like 100 years, they kept it, and the money that land was given to them by Paul Kruger. Um, and this would have allowed the state to have taken from them and given them nothing, and that strikes me as a problem. What's interesting, one of the other examples that's given says where an organ of state holds land that is not being used for its core functions and is not reasonably likely to require the land for its future activities in that regard, and the organ of state acquired the land for no consideration. Yeah, that looks like the right one. So scroll down a bit. Um, the next page will have the list. So I'm busy reading B. Now, organs of state, it's in other words not private citizens. Organs of state are quite broad in the Constitution. How they've been understood. So it could be a city, it could be like public health sectors, ESCOM like parastatals. Bear in mind, of course, that the ANC doesn't run all organs of state. So in the Western Cape, for example, organs of state are run by the DA. Um, and the expropriating authority here might be the national government. So you can imagine it says, we don't like that you have this thing and we don't think you're using it for its core functions. Um, so we're going to take it. There's a proviso, which is that the land was acquired for no consideration, which means they didn't pay anything for it. Um, now, if they think that's a just thing to do, why not add that to the other cases? In other words, where a person got land for paid nothing for it, then you can say, well, we can take it from you for nothing. The state, so other people paid for the land when the speculator went out and bought his land for $1 million, hoped it would be worth $2 million in a couple of years. The state goes, well, yoinks, we're taking it, we're giving you nothing. C is also a concern. So it says where an owner has abandoned land by failing to exercise control over it. We recognize in our law, if you have abandoned something, it becomes what's called res nullius, which means there's no owner. And if it really is truly abandoned, then a state could expropriate it because there's no owner. What worries me about the way that's written is it's abandoned because you didn't exercise control over it. So you can imagine you have a building that you bought and paid for, and it gets hijacked by hijackers, and you now can't control it because other people have it. But you still see it as yours. You haven't actually abandoned it. You would like to evict those hijackers. The state might be able to say, no, 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 it's technically been abandoned, so we're taking it.
Just like we've had a few land grabs over the past, I think like a month ago or something. The EFF took like over 1,000 of its supporters and just went into land and started erecting shacks. I know in my backyard, well, not literally my backyard, I mean like figuratively my backyard, area close to me, there's been land grabs, shacks erected. And that used to, the owner of that land, it used to be a racetrack. So um, obviously now, if this bill comes into fruition, the government can just be like, well, you don't have control over it, so we're going to take it.
Yeah, yeah. So that worries me. D is one that's actually lifted from the Constitution, and I don't have a problem with it. So it matches the text in the Constitution. It's basically where you have a piece of land, but there was a state subsidy, and the value of the subsidy exceeds what the state gave you, or what the thing's worth. So that seems okay. E also worries me. So in a case where you've got a building that has been hijacked and they've ripped out the copper piping, and it's now it's a safety hazard. The idea that the state can take it from you and give you nothing, why is that related to the fact that other people came in and destroyed my place? It's still mine. So if you go to the top of this piece of legislation, you'll see what the Constitution actually says, because it says it's trying to do this. It's all the way to the top, first page. There's a little preamble. Scroll down a little bit. So that's section 25. And this basically says, one is people can't take your property. You can have expropriation under a limited set of circumstances. And you must pay compensation in terms of 3, and you must take into account a bunch of factors. And those are the factors that are listed. So how is it being used? How was it acquired? What's its value? The way our case law is developed is that the value is the first thing you look at, and then you adjust up or down based on the other things. There's that bit I mentioned is in there about investment from the state, and then the purpose of the expropriation. The idea is that it must be for a public purpose. So you've got to be doing something for the public good when you build it, like when you expropriate. So like building a Caltrain project, roads, a dam, that kind of stuff. But the position in our constitution is you must pay when you're going to do that, and that's the position in international law as well. So by having this idea that you can just confiscate things from people and pay them nothing, then you're breaching our constitution, and that's why I say on its face it's unconstitutional. It might be that it affects a narrow set of people. It's definitely not as bad as the constitutional changes would have been, which would have affected like any South African's home, not just farmland. But it's still undermining property rights. I'd imagine what you'd find, for example, is a lot of people who have large tracts of land that they'd bought. Let's say you bought coastal property because you thought, maybe my little town's going to develop. Overnight, that land could become absolutely worthless, and all these people have lost out on their investments because the state could go and take it from them and pay them nothing, and that seems unjust to me and unconstitutional on its face.
Yeah, so there's a few contradictions.
You've cut out on audio.
Sorry. So there's a few contradictions, to say the least. So you said the next step is what? Where does it go from here?
So it's got to go to the National Council of Provinces. That is a rubber stamping body. So we kind of, like in the States, we have 2 different houses. So there they have the senators and the and Congress. NCOP are basically delegates from the different provinces, but because the ANC runs 8 of the 9 provinces, and you need a kind of majority, they're just going to stamp it. I think it's a body that's basically useless in practice, but theoretically could become useful down the line. The president's got to sign it.
Which he will.
Sometimes. So there have been presidents who've not signed things because they don't like it. I would think that Ramaphosa is in a political pickle at the moment and wants to show the more radical elements of the ANC. Don't worry, I'm doing something. I promised EWC, and here it is. I'm delivering. So I wouldn't hold your breath thinking that Ramaphosa is going to save us on this front. I would expect it to be passed, and then I would expect someone to challenge it.
Yeah. Do you have any okay? So do you think who do you think is going to challenge it?
The usual crew of good guys would be my view. And I'll make it very clear that's none of the traditional left NGOs. Those guys during the pandemic did sweet fuck all, I think would be the most polite way of putting it. The good guys are going to be AfriForum, Institute for Race Relations, the Free Market Foundation, Sakeliga, Solidarity. Those are the guys who are going to help fight.
Yeah.
And they've been keeping an eye on expropriation and compensation for many years. And we have made it very clear that we will fight you very, very hard. If you think that Zuma is pulling Stalingrad, we will put him to shame on that front. We will ensure that people's property rights are thoroughly protected.
Fantastic. But I wanted to ask you because I think I asked Herman this, and he's in the chats at the moment. Hello, Herman. He says this is why I said I'm not scared about EWC, rather worry about food. And ladies and gentlemen, please go check out that conversation. It was very interesting. I think I asked also Rob because I had Rob Hutchinson on the show. I interviewed him for 10 minutes. And one of my questions I had to him, but I just want to get your verification on it. If The bill's signed. Well, we know it's going to be signed. Cyril needs his little brownie points. It's signed. It's law. Let's say Sachliche, Solidarity, all those organizations you mentioned decide, okay, we're going to contest it in court. We're going to take it to court. During the time that it's in court and being, battled in court, can the ANC still implement the law?
I would think so, unless there was an order otherwise. So something is a law until set aside. You could obtain interdictory relief to basically say until this is settled, there should be a stay on all expropriation or compensation, and so that's a possibility. Um, that sort of happened in some hate speech cases. So when there was the hate speech definition was initially struck down, there was kind of a pause in a lot of my other litigation to say, look, before you decide, we should see what the Concord decides on this. Um, so yeah, you could have a situation like that.
Okay, cool. Well, let's hope they do that. Freelance Cage said, I just joined. Will they fight the land expropriation bill? Is Mark Oppenheimer worried about the outcome? Okay, so yes, we are talking about the expropriation bill. We just went through it. So if you want, you can rewind. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to have this interview on its own, in the 1 hour on its own, later on in the week if you want to watch it again or share it. But having said that, Mark, yeah, are you worried about the outcome? I mean, you said there are a few concerns, but in a nutshell, for those who are just tuning in, are you worried?
Yes, it sends a bad signal. I think when you start, one of the things that worries me about it is you go, okay, well, my property is not on that list of 5 things, so I guess it's okay. So the state starts with that stuff, says, you know what, we didn't get much pushback. We took people's stuff, didn't put up much of a fight. Cool. Okay. Well, luckily it's not a closed list. What else can we take? We're running out of money here. We can't keep the lights on. So let's just loot and pillage.
Yeah.
Nothing in a closed list there. So what else can I take? Um, so yeah, I'd be worried about it. And I think it's worth fighting hard on it. And I think once property rights start to fail in the country, we know where it goes. If you look at the laws that were changed in Venezuela, they were actually pretty soft. People sort of did the same kind of, Chavez would never want to hurt the people. They would never abuse their authority. I mean, that country, through its abuse of property rights, managed to have one of the world's worst cases of hyperinflation, have 2.5 million people, exit the state, and the others go on the Maduro diet where they lost, 30 kilos. You can have a look at Zimbabwe as well, which, just there, like invading farms, what it didn't just hurt farmers, it led to 90% unemployment. Many Zimbabweans now live in South Africa as in exile because their economy got absolutely ruined. So if you want to, force all your skilled labor out of the country, it's a very quick way. If you want to ensure that you never get any investment again, you want to make sure that AGOA gets cancelled because we're in breach of our agreements with the Americans. Go right ahead, do it. There's some sense in which people often say to me, "It doesn't make sense. This is so irrational. Why would the politicians do this? Surely they must know, the dreadful imperilment that it would put the people that they claim to represent, like all the poverty and devastation that it would cause." But if you're a looting pirate, and you think that the ship is sinking, why not just try and take as much as you can before you head off to Dubai?
Yeah.
It seems there's a lot to be said for it. You know, um,
I said, I think after the last elections, the not the national, the what's it, provisional,
municipal.
municipal elections, because of the way the numbers were for the ANC. Um, I said that what's going to happen now until 2024 is the biggest heist in human history right under our noses. And it's happening. Maybe not the biggest heist, but maybe like biggest heist for South Africa, where, like you just said, they're just going to take what they can. And this is what I was worried about as well, is like it does feel like this bill opens up that door just a little bit more. And it's like, okay, cool, we opened it a little bit. Let's see if we can open it a little bit more until we can take everything that's in the room step by step.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure people remember the story about Pandora's box. Once you
Yep.
crack that thing open, all of hell's greatest visions will fly out. Um,
Yeah. Exactly. So Matthew Dixon has a question for you. He says, please ask Mark to expand on 4B regarding property, not limited to land. Will they take intellectual property?
4B. Let's have a look.
I do still have the thing up here. 4B. Did I go past it now? I just see 4.
Yeah. Um, I don't see it in the as subsection 4. I'll tell you what, Matthew. Why don't you copy and paste the exact text into your question, and then we can have a look at it.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, according to this is the new one, the 2022 whatever bill thing. So there is no 4B. Matthew, you could perhaps be looking at an old one. Or if you can tell us what page on the document, that would also help. All right, so yeah, is there anything else to mention on this bill? I don't think so. I mean, like until like you said, it gets signed off and all that other stuff, and then probably going to be contested in court. There's not really much to do or say until then.
Yeah. I mean, I think doing what you're doing now is an important thing, which is making people aware of it. And if you think that you'd be affected by it, start saving so you can donate to those organizations that are going to fight on your behalf.
Okay. Apparently, 4B was on top of the document. We need pages, people. Oh, I see. I see it here. There we go.
Oh, they're referring to the Constitution itself. That's what they mean. So they mean Section 25 4B.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay, sure. So yes, property is not limited to land. Um, so yes, you could expropriate other kinds of property. Uh, there could be an argument for the ability to expropriate something like intellectual property, so like a patent. Um, there's a question as to whether you're depriving someone of it because they might still be able to use it. But for example, let's say you've got a drug company that produces a life-saving medicine, um, and the government wants to be able to provide it for free by producing a generic. You'd be interfering with their trademark rights. And so, there's an argument that what you're doing is expropriating their intellectual property. And then what you need to do is kind of go through that compensation mechanism, provided that you've met the requirement that it acts as an amount of deprivation. Um,
Alrighty. But I mean, does this fall under? So this would fall under the expropriation. Like,
uh, let's go and have a look at 12.
so like if they wanted to expropriate your bank account, for example.
Yes. So 12.3 specifically refers to land,
Okay.
which is that set that we've looked at.
Okay.
So, yeah, the null compensation bit's only referring to land. That traces back to, if you looked at the history of what that constitutional amendment was going to be, one of the original bits of language that was used referred to land only, and the question put to the public was whether we should allow expropriation of land without compensation. But later versions of the drafts actually didn't refer to land; they referred to all property. Um,
Okay. All right. So we should be okay. But again,
yes, so at least for the null compensation bit,
yeah,
they can't go and take your novel.
yeah. But like we said, door opening just a little bit could lead to more extreme measures. All right. So moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to I know the topic that a lot of people cannot wait for us to talk about, which is Julius Malema, your best friend, Mark. Your pen pal, Your brother in arms.
Sure, yeah, yeah. No, we got to spend 2 glorious days together in court.
All right. So, firstly, I gotta ask because I know that the viewers are gonna like chomping at the bit, probably. Um, what can you say about the court case regarding Kill the Boer? Let me just, whatever you want to say publicly, comment, whatever you want to say, whatever you can say it now so that everybody is happy and won't ask you
Okay.
about that.
So I'll say that I'm limited in what I can say because I appeared in it and it's ongoing. So I'll give a sense of where it's at, which is on the public record, which is that judgment was handed down. The High Court found that singing "Kill the Boer" and singing "Burn These Boers" as a separate song doesn't amount to hate speech. That matter is on appeal. So the High Court granted what's called leave to appeal. In other words, given us the right to bring an appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. So the matter will proceed.
Fantastic. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm not going to ask Mark anything about that case because it is ongoing. Unfortunately, y'all gonna have to wait until probably next year to get the this part two, revenge, revenge of Afriforum. All right. So, but what I wanted to chat to you about is because like it seems like Julius is just untouchable, man. Like the other day, like 2 weeks ago, a week ago, he's in court now, or was in court for that assault charge. Which, I mean, at the face of it, right? We watched the video. The whole nation has seen this video. We can see this guy's pushing this officer or whatever. And I listened to the court judgment when it was being given live, and it sounded like the judge was, I don't want to say changing definitions, but very careful to define certain things in the judgment. Like, for example, saying, again, going with intent. There was almost as if to say, well, Julius at the beginning didn't intend to, and while it's not okay for Julius to lay hands on an officer, there was definitely no intent for violence or harm in the act of pushing him. Something, it was a lot of legal jargon that I tried to decipher, and that's what I kind of understood. But at the end of the day, the judge said Julius is found not guilty, from what I can understand, because there was no intent to really harm the guy. Can you make sense of it?
Yes. So ordinarily, if we think about an assault, it's the intentional and unlawful interference with someone else's bodily integrity. So you've got to check whether you've met the different stages. So was there interference with bodily integrity? Yes. He shoved the guy, right? Okay. Was it unlawful? Now, ordinarily, it's presumed to be unlawful when you interfere with someone's bodily integrity, unless you have a justification. So the justification that Julius gives is he says, well, I believe that I had a right to enter this setting, to participate in the funeral, and this guy was blocking me. So therefore, I was justified in using physical force to obtain entry. And there the court says, no, you weren't. That's not a justification. It remains unlawful. You can't do that. Okay. And then you have a thing that's called a putative justification, which is that when you believed that what you were doing was justifiable. So I'll give you a good example. Someone comes at me with a gun, okay, and I shoot them in self-defense. Okay. We go, okay, that's full proper self-defense. They were endangering your life. The gun's loaded with the bullets. No problem, self-defense. Okay. We inspect the body and we look at it and we go, actually, it wasn't a real gun and the bullets were blanks. Okay. But it was very reasonable to believe that it was a real gun. If you look at that thing, anyone in that moment would have believed it was a real gun. So you weren't actually defending your life because there was no actual threat. So putative self-defense, that's going to be a defense. Here the judge says, or the magistrate says, no, it's not putative either. So he then moves over and says, well, because you didn't believe what you were doing was wrong, it was unintentional. That seems like a confusion to my mind. We have a thing called awareness of the wrongfulness in law. But the classic case of unintentional could be where you're so drunk that you don't know what you're doing, um, or you lose control of your body because you have an epileptic fit. So there's a case of a person who has an epileptic fit while holding a knife and stabs his sister to death. He says, I know I stabbed her to death. I didn't have a defense, but I didn't intend to do it because I lost control of my body. This seems that Julius very much did intend to push the guy. Um, and so it seems that intent is there. And I would think that there is no justification and that there's a sort of jazz hands that goes on here that tries to explain it away. So yeah, I have that concern. We'll see if there's any further moves in the case. There is a worry, of course, as you say, that Julius is Mr. Teflon, and that's you know either we have justice for everybody and the rules apply to everybody, or we don't. And I think if people get the sense that some people, especially if they're well-connected politicians, can get away with things, that undermines the justice system. Now, maybe there's some room for debate in this case, and we shall see. But there is a dangerous signal that could be perceived to be said. I mean, I think Steve Hoffman said, Julius Malema is an incredible legal innovator because he's redefined what assault is and what hate speech is.
Yeah, well, that's kind of true. I mean, it worries me because, look, I mean, I'll say it because I think I can say it while that hate speech bill is still being drawn up. I think either the judge was bought or someone threatened him in some way. He was scared, and he worked really hard to come up with this judgment that is so, I mean, it's like the judgment with the case you were working on. There's so many gaps, there's so many inconsistencies, contradictions, because one moment he's saying no, it was wrong for Julius to lay the hand on the officer, whatever, blah blah, and we could all see that. But like you said, it's like, yeah, but he wasn't, I don't know what legal jargon to basically say, like, yeah, but you know what, you didn't mean it, man. It's okay. It's like, what? Like, this guy assaulted another guy, and he's just getting away with it. And I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with the firearm situation now, because, I mean, that I think was postponed until early next year. It's the evidence is mounting against Julius. It's going to be very difficult for him to weasel out of this one. But I don't know. In a way, I wouldn't be surprised if he does get away with it.
One thing I'll say about that firearms case. So when I was cross-examining Mr. Malema, I said to him, when you sing "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," you don't just sing the song; you accompany it with hand gestures which look like guns, and you're going pow, pow, pow. And he said, "Well, if we meant it, I would stand on a stage with a real gun." So I then said to him, "Would you do that?" And he freaked out and refused to answer. And I said, "Why won't you answer?" And he said, "Well, because I'm being prosecuted for standing on a stage with a real gun and firing into the air, so I can't say anything further." Um, Once my case concluded, that criminal case was meant to go on the next week, and the prosecutor resigned from the NPA. She said, "I'm not willing to endure the abuse that Mr. Oppenheimer went through." We had, I can say this, which is some unprecedented stuff happened in our case, which is that we had people invade the court and sing Dibulu Bunu at us, breaking into the courthouse. We had people outside the court singing Kill the Boer at us, blockading us, not letting us exit the building, not letting us enter the building. So you've got physical threats. We go to court with bodyguards, and sometimes those bodyguards have to jump into action to protect us. So, I think this prosecutor said, "I don't want to go through that," and resigned, not just from the case, but from the profession. And so someone else had to be appointed on the day. They were given an extra day to prep, and that's it. So that's why we've had some postponements in the matter. But that's the worry that you have, as you say, is that, when you've got external pressures, how do you ensure that justice is done? That's a worry.
Sorry, Mark, did you say from the profession?
Yeah, she's not a prosecutor anymore.
Not even a lawyer, or just like just specifically prosecutor?
Not at the NPA. Yeah,
Okay.
so
All
I'm
right.
not sure what she's done since.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I thought like you made it sound like she completely gave up law and like went into, I don't know, jewelry making or something. Um, but still, either way, that's pretty hectic for someone to experience that and then be so freaked out that they would decide, you know what, this is not worth it. But that's, again, that's like, in a way, it's like it really does make me think that this man Julius has so much influence that either he scares people, pays for them, and that's the scary part. I mean, I think it's no secret that in South Africa we live in a kind of a mafia state, so it's not beyond a reasonable doubt to suggest that Julius may be paying to win some of his cases. And but I mean, at some point, something's got to give, because again, with the firearm situation, it's very hard to deny that he's shooting that gun. Number one. Number two, there's ballistics evidence, as far as I remember. So that also ties you to the gun. And they said that they argued that, oh, we were shooting blanks, but there was a gun expert there to say, no, that's not true. There's evidence that there was real bullets fired. So yeah, the only thing I can think of that might go wrong is that evidence goes missing, and then it's dismissed.
Well, we wait to see. I mean, there's another case that's been hovering in the wings. So he was charged with breaching the Rights Assemblies Act, which is a kind of speech crime where you call on people to commit a crime. In this case, it was invading land. And so they challenged the constitutionality of the Right Assemblies Act, and the Constitutional Court looked at it and said it's fine. And so we would have expected the prosecution to have continued by now. And I think that was handed down pre-COVID. So, that's a worry. Where's the NPA on that? In other words, you've got the go-ahead to prosecute on this thing, complete the job. Um, I mean, one of the reasons why the firearms case went ahead is because, AfriForum said, if you don't prosecute, we'll do it. Give us an LA prosecutor, and then suddenly they said, okay, fine, we'll do it. So AfriForum are there on a watching brief.
Yeah.
We, of course, see the dark side of private prosecutions with what's happening to Karen Moore at the moment. I mean, this is like an absolute outrage where, Jacob Zuma is trying to privately prosecute her for disclosing a document that became public by the time she'd reported on it. Medical records which were in a public, court document. This is just an absolute abuse of process, and basically trying to terrorize, one of the dominant legal journalists that we have in the country. That seems, and the person prosecuting him, very distasteful.
Let me ask you something, Mark. I mean, you experience now Julius in court. I think you handled yourself very well. Would you do it again?
In a heartbeat. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think someone's got to do it. Someone's got to hold people to account. I will say this as well, which is, I mentioned this before. Advocates have the cab rank rule, which is, even if I felt uncomfortable, and even if I didn't want to do it, if I'm asked, I'm obliged. And I think that's one of the things that is an important part of the profession, is that we, don't pick our clients. We act for those that ask. And I think, unfortunately, that cab rank principle has become less and less popular. I definitely get the sense that, not everybody approves of the work that I do and will hold that against me. But so be it.
Well, I mean, like you said, someone's got to do it, man, and you're always gonna have haters. So if you're
Yeah,
not hated, then you're doing something wrong.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, when you're on your deathbed, you want everyone to say, you know what? Mark was such a sweetheart. He was such a nice guy. Like, never offended anybody, never ruffled any feathers, never did anything particularly impressive though. But
I think they'll still say that, except for the last part. You are a nice guy. You are like all that stuff, sweet and all that stuff. And even with like Julius, you were very calm, and he was freaking out, and you were just like, calm nerves, like so calm. And I don't know, man. I think that kind of ruffled his feathers even more, because I think he likes chaos, and you were just so patient and calm that yeah, he just couldn't figure it out. But
Like I've had a lot of practice. It's been 370 years since I arrived in 1652. So you kind of that ocean ride from Holland all the way here. It's made me very calm.
yeah. All right. Well, on that lovely note, Mark, I just want to thank you once again for joining me on the show. It's a great conversation tonight. We touched on quite a few topics, and we'll definitely keep an eye on this stuff. I'll have you back again, I'm sure. We'll see what the judgment of the firearm case is going to be. We'll see how the appeal goes. We'll talk about that stuff. So we'll definitely have you back again soon. Mark, is there anything you want to say in closing? But before you do, let me just check. Yes, so. Okay, no, there's no more questions. Cool. So is there anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, Joe, it's been great being on the show. I always enjoy it. For those that are interested in the litigation that I do, I've got a personal channel on YouTube that's Mark Oppenheimer, where I keep a list of those cases and submissions to Parliament, and you can watch the videos. For those that are interested in something of a different nature, I run a philosophy discussion show with Jason Werbelov called Brain in a Vat. We've done about 140 episodes now, and yeah, all sorts of weird and wonderful, interesting thought experiments, and we've had some of the world's best philosophers on there. So if you're looking for something a bit different, have a look.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please go give that a subscribe. Mark, once again, thank you for your time. I'll chat to you later.
Cool.
Cheers.